Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. This is Dr. Mike Ronces Valley. Super glad you joined me today. Always glad to sit with people on Wednesdays, 12:15 Eastern time, to just talk about things that can get you healthier and help you stay healthy. That's really the whole goal of Live Well. That's the whole goal of our Live Well coaching platform. Just get you in situations where you feel like you're developing skills and tools and things you need to start to live the life you've always wanted. So always a pleasure. Hope you guys are having a good day. So I love these things. We talk about it all the time. I love just taking moments and being able to speak into you guys. And one of the funnest parts is figuring out, okay, what am I actually going to talk about, right? Because we could talk about a million things that can help people live better and get healthy and stay healthy. And I got a ton of feedback from one of the Wellness Wednesdays I did on relationships. And I wanted to follow that today with some very specific information about communication. Because we know communication is paramount when it comes to relationships, right? So if you're married, if you're in a significant romantic relationship, man, if you're not communicating well, it's just hard to do anything else well, right? It's just hard to feel like you're in a good relationship if you can't communicate. So I wanted to take moments and dig into communication and help you begin to understand some things that you could learn about yourself and about the other person you're in a relationship with to begin to communicate really differently. And I think that's our goal, right? I do have one caveat, and the caveat is if you're not in a romantic relationship, don't turn this thing off. Don't turn this content off. Keep listening, keep watching, because what we're about to talk about can have relevance for you in future relationships, right? So if you're alive and you're breathing, there is a possibility that you're going to be in a romantic relationship, right? Like hopefully most of you are saying, okay, I'd at least be open to that. But this also has relevance for the way we communicate with people in any kind of relationship, right? So we're all in relationships. So even if you're not in a romantic relationship, you have a relationship hopefully with some family. You have a relationship with neighbors or friends. You have a relationship with people at work that you're on a team with. So the idea of taking responsibility for communicating well is what today is about. So it doesn't matter what relationship you're in, doesn't matter who you're interacting with, what we'll talk about today will be relevant. It's especially relevant if you have a difficult relationship. Now, marriage is difficult. So we're going to start, if you're married, this is going to be super important, right? Because every marriage has challenges. That's just life. Take two people, different ideas, experiences, families of origin. They're going to enter a marriage and have moments where you're dealing with something. And so that in and of itself lends itself to say, okay, there's moments where I've got to lean in and take responsibility for the way I'm communicating and the things that I'm bringing to the table in this marriage that contribute to the problems. But it would be any difficult relationship that when the heat is on, that's when we struggle to communicate. Most of us can function in communication when we're having a great time, right? So if you're at the mountaintop, if the team just won an award, if you guys just finished a project, if you're at a party at your neighbor's house, that's usually fine, right? If your romantic relationship is, we're going out to dinner and it's fun and it's a great meal, most of us do fine. It's when the heat is on. It's when the temperature rises. My expectations are not what I want them to be. That's huge, right? When my expectations are not met, that's when we get into these ingrained patterns that really make communication difficult. So we could go 1,000 different directions with how to communicate well, but what I wanted to do is give you some very well-researched principles that can speak directly to how to communicate and what to watch for in regard to difficult, tense conversations and tense relationships. So I'm going to base what we talk about today on the work of John Gottman. I've talked about him before a lot in my work. I've talked about him on Wellness Wednesday before, I think. So John Gottman is a relationship researcher, I think is what I'd call him. He's out west in the Northwest, and he's got what they call the Relationship Lab. The Relationship Lab is this research study where couples come, and they're going to be involved in a research study, right? But the research study is actually the waiting room. So they show up for the research, they sit in the waiting room, and what they don't know is there's a team of people that are watching them through a one-way mirror. And that team of people's literally, they're like writing down, tracking everything they say, how they interact. And they've done this so much. Gottman has studied couples for so long. They've watched so many couples fight or be bored together or talk about magazine articles together that they can identify divorce and predict it with like 70-something% accuracy after watching a couple interact for 15 minutes. Is that crazy or what? So they've learned some very real patterns that tend to create problems in relationships, especially when the temperature goes up, right? Especially when the heat is on. So I want to talk to you about what Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of communication. The 4 horsemen it's kind of a metaphor, really, of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the New Testament. So those of you that are Christian, you've heard of these 4 horsemen, right? It's a biblical kind of metaphor, and they describe conquest and war and hunger and death, essentially. And so Gottman uses those 4 horsemen as a way to describe like this dysfunctional communication style that, according to Gottman's research, can predict literally the end of your relationship. Wow. So the stakes are high. So how do we know if our relationship is in trouble? How do you know if your romantic relationship is in trouble? And by extension, how do we know if a relationship with a family member's in trouble, or a close friend, or even a boss or a coworker? First horseman that Gottman talks about is criticism. Criticism. Criticizing your partner is different than offering a critique. And a lot of people really get that confused. They hear a critique or a complaint or a problem, and they're like, oh, stop. Let me shut that down. You're criticizing me. That's one of the 4 horsemen. That's going to screw up our relationship. We're doomed. We really need to understand criticism and the concept of criticism and the pervasive nature of a critical spirit in a relationship is different than, hey, I have an issue, I have a complaint, or I have a critique of you. The latter is about specific issues, right? So if I have a critique or a complaint, it's like, hey, I was scared when you didn't call me when you were late coming home. I thought you were in trouble. Did you get in a car accident? So there's this behavior that you had. You're late, and I want to talk to you about that, or even confront you about it, because it's not what we agreed on. That's not criticism, at least in the sense that Gottman is talking about. That's a complaint. That's a critique. Hey, you said you'd call, you didn't. That has to be fair game in a relationship. Criticism is literally an attack on your partner's personhood, on their character. You're literally dismantling their whole being when you engage this concept of criticism. And so how is that different from a complaint? Criticism says something like this. You know what? You never think about how your behavior is affecting me. I can't believe that you're that forgetful. You're that selfish. You told me you would call when you're late. You didn't call. And you're basically a piece of crap. Now, I know you probably don't start like that. We probably don't start like that. But that's the idea of criticism is you take this issue, like I have an issue with you, but you don't just describe the issue, you describe the person. What's wrong with you? Why would you do that? You're selfish. You're messed up. Like that is criticism. You see the difference? All right. If you find that there's moments where even in a romantic relationship, you're engaging criticism, don't freak out. Just because there have been moments when you've looked at your partner and you've like defined them with a word, like you selfish piece of crap, that doesn't mean things are over. The problem with criticism is when it becomes pervasive. Because as you begin to sort of engage criticism over time, consistently, all the time, it paves the way for the far deadlier horsemen to follow, right? So you have to think about it like this. When you criticize someone, you're literally, you're making the person you're criticizing feel assaulted. It feels like it comes out of nowhere. Like I was late. What are you talking about? Like I'm a selfish piece of crap. I was late. Makes them feel rejected, makes them feel hurt. And then it allows you to kind of get in a situation where the criticism becomes sort of a self-definition, not only of the person who's criticizing, but of the victim. You think I'm selfish. You think I'm a bad person. You think I'm unintelligent. You think I don't think things through. And so you have the criticizer who becomes very comfortable repeating the same narrative. And then you have the person who's criticized who begins to self-identify, or at least attach their sense of self in the relationship to those labels. And what happens is you start to see criticism go from like this once in a while thing that I had a bad day, I had a tough moment, to now it's happening more and more and more with greater frequency and greater frequency, which eventually leads to the second horseman. The second horseman Gottman describes is contempt. And contempt is when we communicate basically deep disrespect for other people. So when we treat people with contempt, we mock them, we give them a bunch of sarcasm, we ridicule them, we call them names, we mimic them. And some of you need to take a hard look at yourself. You're doing this stuff, like your spouse says something, or your friend says something, and you find yourself just in your own head, you're mimicking the way they say it. If it's really bad, you'll do it back to them, right? You'll use their tone of voice and kind of gig them like that. And so when you engage contempt in a relationship, the target of the contempt starts to feel some pretty significant emotions. When someone ridicules you, has sarcasm, all the eye rolling, all the name calling, what happens inside of you? Well, you start to feel, number one, you feel despised. Like, this person hates me. Like, what? Why do you hate me? You feel worthless. What is wrong with me? Like, why would they treat me this way? And contempt goes beyond criticism, because while criticism attacks your partner's character, contempt assumes a position of moral authority over your partner. That's rough, man. Does that make sense? Some of you, either you or your spouse, you or your friend, some of you are in these situations at work where you say, man, over time, I've kind of put myself like I've got the moral high ground, and you're less than and not enough. and I see this pattern play out in your life all the time, and I'm tired of it, and I don't want to deal with it anymore. And you really have this judgmental attitude. If you're on the other side of that, can you imagine? Can you imagine how it feels to feel that sense of contempt, especially in a romantic relationship? Dude, that sucks. That sucks to feel like I'm in the one down position because this person continually just attacks and ridicules and speaks poorly about it. And I can tell that they just are not a fan anymore. Super, super difficult. So research shows that couples that are contemptuous of each other are literally more likely to suffer infectious illness than couples that aren't contemptuous of one another. That's wild. Think about that. More colds, more flu. It essentially weakens your immune system. When you're in a relationship that feels like there's a superiority and one person's got a leg up and one person's in the one down position, that has such a drastic impact upon the level of stress you feel and your self-confidence that you will get sick more often. I don't know any other way to say it. If that's not an indication of the brain-body connection, I don't know what is. And if that's not an indication of how kind of toxic this contemptuous sort of posture is, I don't know what is. So we've got criticism, we've got contempt, and then you've got defensiveness. The third horseman is defensiveness, and it's typically a response to criticism. So we've all been defensive, and I would say that defensiveness is omnipresent in difficult relationships. In relationships that aren't going well, we get used to just constantly feeling like we've got to push back. And unfortunately, the more you push back and you say, not me, I didn't do that, I didn't say that, you don't understand me, the more we do that defensive thing, the more unsuccessful our relationship gets, because our excuses just tell our partner that we don't take their concerns seriously. So some of us are in situations where we feel criticized so often, we feel like we're never enough, that it's just a knee-jerk reaction that when we feel maybe just a complaint coming on, it's met with, boom, not me. You don't understand. Now, I think there's a family of origin connection here as well, because a lot of times people grow up in situations today where they were taught to be defensive. And when you enter a relationship and your posture is defensiveness, and you have a strong family history of defensiveness, it almost normalizes the idea that I don't have to own behavior, or I can talk around my behavior, or I can give excuses for my behavior, or I can just deny that's a problem. And I think the more defensive we are, the less intimacy we're able to have in a relationship. Does that make sense? Because if your partner's coming to you, say it's a work situation and your teammate is coming to you, and you're like, hey, I really think we need to look at this issue. You've been over talking in meetings and it comes across as sort of arrogant or like you're not fully listening. Man, if you come back at that team member with, what's everybody's deal? We all need to grow up and I'm not trying to talk over people. We've got to get through meetings. And we can't sit around for 2 hours and baby everybody. We've got to just move on. Maybe you're not even wrong. I mean, maybe you're right. At this point, whether you're right or wrong doesn't matter. If you respond to a request or an idea or an opinion that's offered in goodwill with defensiveness, not me, no way. I don't know why do you always have to come at me like this? I didn't mean to say it. That's not my intention. If you respond like that, all you're doing is shutting down communication, and you're encouraging the relationship to go further and further into essentially the apocalyptic nature of the four horsemen. You're ensuring the relationship is not going to be good. All right. Finally, the fourth horseman is stonewalling. Stonewalling is usually a response to contempt. So stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the interaction, shuts down, and literally just simply stops responding to the other person. And rather than confronting the issue with their partner, people who stonewall can make evasive maneuver. Like they kind of like just turn away. They act busy. They engage in something else. And it keeps them from actually having to interact with the person minute by minute, moment by moment. So I challenge you to kind of think this through. When you are having a difficult conversation with someone, do you find yourself walking away? When someone's coming to you with an issue, especially if it's criticism, do you find yourself just, busying yourself? So I'm going to start washing the dishes, or I'm going to, pick up my phone and start looking at my phone when you're trying to talk to me. That's probably a symptom of stonewalling. And the issue with stonewalling is many times it's driven by what we call psychological flooding. And when you're psychologically flooded, that just means you're so overwhelmed by the stimulation. You're so overwhelmed by what the person is saying. Maybe you're so done with the contemptuous nature of things in the relationship that it's stressing you out, and your brain begins to kind of just feel very, very overwhelmed. You're not thinking clearly. It's probably because you feel threatened, right? And what happens when we feel threatened? We've talked about this. I don't know. Every Wellness Wednesday, your frontal lobe shuts down, your amygdala hijacks your brain. Your amygdala is the size of an almond. It begins to make you feel like you're crazy, right? Because you're in fear threat mode. So your heart rate goes up. You begin to sweat. Maybe your stomach's hurting. Your thoughts are racing. You're just completely flooded with the emotional and physiological response of the fear threat mode of the brain. So it makes sense why this happens, right? Because if your brain is essentially shut down, then it puts you in a situation where you can't fully think through. Like a lot of you, if someone's coming at you in a contemptuous way, you have the capacity to think through, well, this person loves me and they care for me. Or if it's, a neighbor, I know this person's character and integrity, and they're not a bad person, and they're trying to build the relationship. That's why they're coming to me. Those are all rational thoughts. But when you get stuck in the fear threat mode, you just can't think clearly. So everything just sort of shuts down in the frontal lobe. The amygdala begins to just hijack your brain, and you can't think. And that's why you want to get away. How many of you are in relationships where when the person approaches, you just want to get away? I don't want to have this conversation. Now, we know what happens, right? You know what happens when you stonewall. It never works well. It never works well. Because if the person is coming to you in goodwill, then they feel super rejected and as if you don't care and you don't care to listen to them or their opinion, right? If they're coming to you in a contemptuous way, like they literally do feel like they're in a one-up position, what does stonewalling do? It puts you in a position where they begin to judge you. Now they have more ammunition, right? See? You don't even care. You don't even have the capacity to interact with me. Would you quit washing the dishes? Would you quit looking at your phone? Would you quit walking out of this room? So that, that power differential kind of goes even more because now they're looking down and judging more. So the idea behind all of this is that the four horsemen don't work. They're just toxic for all of our relationships. We want to talk about what we do about this. I think that's huge, right? There is an anecdote for each one of the four horsemen. So let me go through those quickly with you. The first anecdote would be for contempt. Contempt shows up in statements that come from a position of superiority, right? So some example of the contempt, like we said, is sarcasm, cynicism, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, mockery, hostile humor. Contempt, look, it's just destructive. It's defeating. By the way, I should have said this before. It's the greatest predictor of divorce. The greatest predictor of divorce. So if you've got contempt in your relationship, especially a marriage, you need to pay attention. The antidote for contempt is to build a culture of appreciation and respect in the marriage. And so, obviously, super easy for me to say, right? If you guys have been involved in enough criticism to where you feel like this power differential, it's super hard to build a culture of appreciation and respect because, you don't feel valued. But I've got to tell you, one person has to take a step forward. Gary Smalley, a Christian psychologist, he's gone now. He passed away. But man, I used to appreciate so much his use of this term. He would talk about the power of one person to change a relationship. And you would be shocked and surprised by what happens if you allow yourself in a contemptuous relationship to say, okay, I'm going to take responsibility to take the first step forward. I'm going to take responsibility to build a different culture, and we're going to start with appreciation, and we're going to start with respect. So, look, I know that that's difficult. I know that that's not easy, but especially if you're in the one-up position and you're listening to this talk and you're like, man, I think that might be where I'm at in this relationship, whether you're a boss or an employee or husband or a wife, take it upon yourself to say, I will fight to communicate admiration, appreciation, and respect for this person. If you're in a marriage, there's one thing that you can do that actually helps, and that's to look at the idea of what it really means to be married. Because what it really means to be married is you're my number one. When we're down, when we're up, think of the vows you took when you got married. In sickness and in health, for richer or poor. It doesn't matter where we're at. You're my number one. And I make that commitment to you. And so if you're my number one, how would I treat the person who's my number one? Yeah, but Mike, she's hurt me, or he's been difficult, or he's really defensive, and she's stonewall. I don't care what the other person is doing. I'm saying your job is to say, there's the power of one. What's going to happen when I reach out and I say, I'm going to build a culture of respect, admiration, and appreciation? It makes a difference. Catch your spouse doing something good. If you're a boss, catch your employee doing something good, affirm the heck out of them. Make that your knee-jerk response. And I promise you, you'll be surprised by what happens when you allow yourself to just say, I'm going to do the healthy thing, regardless of what I feel like, regardless of what I want to do, regardless of what the other person deserves. I'm going to do the healthy thing. All right, that's the antidote for contempt. What's the antidote for criticism? Criticism attacks a person's very character. The antidote for criticism is to complain without blame by using a gentle, soft startup. And this is based on some of Gottman's research, because what he found is people that start quick, you can get from like 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds flat. Like those relationships are the worst. So that, man, when the temperature in the room can just rise immediately, those relationships struggle. So if you can discipline yourself to say, okay, I'm not going to stop talking. You can't stop talking. If you have a complaint, you've got to be able to bring stuff to the table, right? Shouldn't be pervasive, shouldn't be all the time, but there's got to be moments where you can step up and say, hey, I've got an issue. When you step up, the goal is to say, okay, I'm going to do it in a way that's warm and that's soft. And the way you frame it is super important. I did a counseling session the other day with someone that I'm supervising, and we were working with this family, and I got called into this session because it was pretty intense, right? What was going on with these parents and their kid was tough, and we had to, like, as a team, talk about, okay, what are we going to do? Because these parents have to stop what they're doing. And so I sat in on this session, this parent training session. And when I got done, my supervisee came to me and they were like, Mike, I got to tell you, that was interesting. I learned a lot when I was in there with you. And I was like, well, that's awesome. Wasn't expecting that. What did you learn? What happened? Because I'm just kind of doing my thing. And she said, you're very disarming and calm when you're saying very piercing words. And I thought about that for a minute. I was like, I kind of think I agree with her. Over time, dealing with people in therapy, I have developed this ability to just say some very challenging things. But the way you say challenging things is important. The tone you set, the way you say it, the tone of voice you use, your facial expression, like, it all matters a lot. And so I think when you think about a quick startup, like from 0 to 60, like if you come in with guns loaded, man, that's super hard to deal with. People feel assaulted by it, like just kind of overtaken by it. If you come in, you can say the same words. You don't have to pussyfoot around. You don't have to like pretend you're not really saying things. It can be clear and direct and open and honest and authentic and real and even frank, but do it in a way that retains the person's dignity. You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. You'll be able to say things, very challenging things. But if you're communicating warmth simultaneously, it has the power to crush criticism. All right, what's the antidote for stonewalling? The antidote for stonewalling is to essentially allow the person to have moments where they can break from the conversation. Because remember, stonewalling is, I'm flooded with emotion. I'm overwhelmed. I can't even process. My frontal lobe is shut down. If you try to like push into that and lean into that and say, you're freaking going to have this conversation with me, sit down. Does that ever work? Like, how many times does that work with an adult? I mean, it doesn't even work with kids. How many times does it work with your spouse or with your employee? I mean, you might get compliance because you're freaking them out, but you're certainly not going to build a relationship that way. You have to think of someone who's flooded as scared. This helps a lot. You have to redefine them. They look disinterested. They look dismissive. They look like they don't care about you at all or anything you have to say. It's actually the opposite. They're neurologically, they're in a fear state. And if you just like come at the person and force them to talk when they're in a fear state, what happens? They get more scared, right? Now, they might not feel it as scared. They might feel it as anger. They might feel it as anxiety. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about what word they use to describe it. Neurologically, they're in a fear state. Fight or flight has hijacked their brain. So when you force the issue in that moment, it's only going to make their emotional reaction more intense. And when their emotional reaction is more intense, they're going to stonewall more. So you've got to figure out how you can discipline yourself to say, okay, when my spouse or my employee or my friend is stonewalling, I don't need to interpret that as disrespect or uninterest. I need to interpret that as fear. And how do I need to treat someone who's scared and whose brain is on fire? I need to treat them like they have time and effort and an ability to just sort of withdraw from the stimuli and calm their brain and their body down. That's super challenging for some of us because we're a dog on a bone. I want to go after this. I want to fix this. I want to make this happen. I want to do this differently. You've got to hear me. We can't keep avoiding the situation. We can't just continue to not talk about our problems. That's what we do, right? All you're doing is creating your reality. Build into the relationship the idea, hey, I can see you're just literally disconnecting right now. Let's relax. Let's take a break. 10 minutes. Now, the biggest issue is if you're the person who's stonewalling and you do not give the other person an assurance that you're coming back to the conversation, you're going to blow it because they're never going to be able to do this. They can't just like walk away from issues because you refuse to engage. It's not going to work. You've got to be willing to say, okay, thank you for the break. Let's come back in 10 minutes or let's talk in 30 minutes or tomorrow morning at breakfast. Let's go over this. That helps immensely. It's incredible what it does when people's brain and bodies are calm and they're able to engage. And then finally, the antidote to defensiveness. Defensiveness is a self-protection in the form of righteous indignation. So many people become defensive when they're criticized, but the problem is that being defensive never helps to solve the problem at hand. So defensiveness is really just a way of blaming your partner. You're saying that the problem isn't me, the problem is you. Don't come to me with all these. This is your issue, not mine. I'm not the issue, not me, right? So the antidote to defensiveness is to take responsibility. You guys are hating this Wellness Wednesday, aren't you? I know we all do. I'm thinking about this, putting myself in that situation. I'm like, man, it's the last thing I want to do when I want to just say, you don't even get me. You don't understand. I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to do that. You don't understand my intention. That's not where I'm at. Why do you always blame me? What? Stop. Listen. Hear them out. They probably don't understand you. They probably don't understand your intentions. They probably don't get it. They probably don't see you for who you are. They probably don't understand that you were trying to help. None of that matters. The only way through defensiveness is to say, okay, you know what? All good. I've got nothing to prove. Let me hear you. Let me understand. I get it. Okay, let me hear it. Come on. I'm not going to tell you not me. I'm not going to tell you I didn't mean to. I'm just going to listen. I'm going to hear you. And if we do that, you set a different tone. That doesn't mean that you agree with everything your spouse says. That doesn't mean that you have to be just like, yes, ma'am, may I have another? You don't have to act like that. But you do need to say, okay, I'm willing to take responsibility for what's mine, and at least start with hearing your concern. Helps a lot if you feel defensive. Before you say anything, listen to what your spouse has said, paraphrase it, and summarize it. Say, I just want to make sure I'm getting you right. So you're saying, fill in the blank. You feel like I was disrespectful when I didn't support you with our kid when we were disciplining them earlier. I was disrespectful because I didn't agree with you, and am I getting you right? You'll be shocked, man. When people hear that back, they at least can say, okay, you understand. Now you guys can have a conversation about what support looks like and what healthy looks like. And hey, here's what we'll do next time. You don't have to like meekly agree with everything they say, but you do need to listen. A lot of marriages have ended over who's right. Screw that, man. Who cares who's right? What matters is my ability to kind of be mature enough to accept what I need to accept and accept responsibility when I need to, listen and hear you and understand, so that we at least have a common ground to go forward. All right, guys. The 4 horsemen. You now know what they are. You know what the antidote is. Now your only job is to use these skills, right? The battlegrounds in your mind. Don't walk away from this video and just say, I'm going to do life as normal. You have information now. Let's do this differently. Use your antidotes. Think through in your mind, hey, what do I typically deal with? And am I willing to engage the antidote to that problem? Whether it's criticism or contempt or defensiveness or stonewalling. What do I typically deal with? Me. Not your spouse. Me. What do I deal with? And am I willing to use that antidote? And then send the video to your spouse. Let them watch it. Let them do the same thing. If you're a spouse and your partner just asked you to watch this, or you're a boss and your employee asked you to watch this, do the same. Don't look at what they're doing wrong. Look at what you're doing wrong. Look at what you can bring to the table. Look at the power of one person to change a relationship, because it's real. All right, guys. Hope you had a great time on Wellness Wednesday. Hope you got a ton of information, and I hope that you have a great day. Don't forget, tell your friends about the Live Well Coaching platform. Tell as many people as you can about our community, and we want you to all just be, contributing. Go into the platform right now. Make a comment on one of the community pages about this video, and let's just start some dialogue together.